Well, thank you very much. What a great lunch we've had. We had lots to think about from such a wonderful panel this morning. My gratitude again to 4 excellent papers this morning. Thank you so much. I'm going to do another hand for great paper. Great job. That first panel set the bar high for the second panel. Again, Gleaves Whitney, Director of the Hauenstein Center for Presidential Studies here at Grand Valley State University. Delighted that you are here with us this afternoon. We now move to our second panel, the Founding Fathers and the Lessons of Antiquity. The 3 very distinguished scholars who will be presenting, and I am delighted to be able to be joined by Jeremy McIntyre. Professor McIntyre will be the chair of this panel. Jeremy McIntyre is Professor of Classical Studies at the University of Pennsylvania. He is also chair of the graduate group in the Art and Archaeology of the Mediterranean World. He earned his Ph.D. from the University of California at Berkeley. He was a Wheeler Fellow at the American School of Classical Studies at Athens and has excavated in Israel, Corinth, and on Crete. He serves on the managing committee of the American School of Classical Studies in Athens, Greece. He has a number of very interesting publications, and I have a feeling we're going to get to hear a little bit about those as well. Professor McInerney, please join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Gleaves. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And may I begin by expressing my deep thanks to Mr. Hauenstein for fostering this wonderful event. And my congratulations to the first panel speakers who were really glorious before lunch. It's going to be a hard act to follow, particularly since I think most of us are going to be fighting off the effects of the roast beef sandwiches. I'm hoping that the students from Black River will be as quiet and courteous in the second half as they were in the first half. If they fall asleep, I'll put it down to the effects of lunch rather than our terrible talks. Earlier this week, we received the joyful news that Captain Richard Phillips had been released from captivity after a daring and successful intervention by US forces. This was merely the latest crisis that the Obama administration has had to face in its short time in office. I could have begun, though, of course, with a North Korean rocket, or a satellite, or the collapse of the economy, because the pace at which crises blow up and flame out in our media-saturated world makes it very difficult to concentrate on such weighty matters as the lessons from antiquity and the current administration. The President is going to face 4 years of continuous crisis. So will there be time for sober reflection and consideration of the lessons of the past? When first approached to participate today, I was primarily focused on the first great theoretician of war, society, and human nature, Thucydides, who you've already heard described in various papers this morning and last night. The Athenian general whose work begins a venerable Western tradition that includes Machiavelli and Hobbes. But I must admit that when first thinking about the lessons of the past and the Obama administration, I was thinking about large-scale, full-scale wars, such as Iraq and to a lesser extent Afghanistan. In the context of full-scale wars, Thucydides supplies some insights that deserve attention. For example, in describing the civil war that afflicted Corcyra, modern-day Corfu, in 427, he describes an outbreak of violence that, in his description, looks remarkably like the Hutu-Tutsi violence in Rwanda. Thucydides, in describing this dreadful civil war, was moved to write as follows: "In peace and prosperity, cities and individuals alike are better minded because they're not plunged into the necessity of doing anything against their will. But war is a harsh teacher. It gives most people impulses that are as bad as their situation, and then it takes away the easy supply of what they need for daily life." Now, think about this for a moment, the idea of war as a harsh teacher. If you believe that, as I do, then it follows that demonizing an enemy, any enemy, represents a failure of imagination. A failure to recognize that under the right circumstances, or I should probably say under the wrong circumstances, even the best may be reduced to doing the worst. Now, a civil war in Corsair is surely not the same as either a campaign against Somali pirates or the Taliban in Afghanistan or insurgents in Iraq. So the question is there anything to be learned from reading Thucydides? Now, let me preface my answer by explaining his view of history. Thucydides was reacting to a style of history writing, such as you find in the work of Herodotus, his predecessor, in which the audience might well consist of a group sitting around listening to a nice prose story with romantic and dramatic elements, including the story of Croesus. And Croesus, on his funeral pyre at the end of his reign, is shaking his fist at Apollo and saying, "Why did you deceive me into attacking the Persians?" An episode that Professor Garland alluded to earlier today. "It was your destiny," replies the god of prophecy, "to expiate the sins of your ancestors 5 generations earlier when they acquired the throne of Lydia through the immoral deceptions of a woman." So the sort of history that was going on in Thucydides' day was basically one that was like Lifetime TV, the Sunday night movie, a wonderful story in which you were asked to believe that the fate of an empire depended upon something that had happened to your great-great-great-great-grandmother. And because she was a naughty lady, you end up on a funeral pyre punished by the god. No, says Thucydides, reacting to this Mills and Boon romantic version of history. That's not what history is about. My history may not be the most delightful to hear, since there is no mythology in it, he says scornfully. But those who want to look into the truth of what was done in the past, which given the human condition will recur in the future, either in the same fashion or nearly so, those readers will find this history valuable enough, as I have composed this not as a display speech to win a prize today, but as a possession for all time. Katema Ezaieh, the most arrogant piece of Greek ever written. And yet, ironically, correct, because we're still reading it today. So it is still a possession for all time. Now here is the ground zero for the basic notion, a notion that this conference has returned to on several occasions over the last 2 days, that because human nature is the same, human history will always play out along predictable lines, either repeating itself or coming close to that. Now this is a favourite view among those who, for example, will always return to Nazism as the test case of how or how not to behave. We appeased Hitler and saw the sorry outcome of that policy. Therefore, do not appease Osama bin Laden, do not appease Kim Il-jong, the dear leader, Saddam Hussein, Pol Pot, or whoever else happens to be on our hit list. But I want to stop us short and ask a basic question. Are there lessons in history? And I'm not referring here to the subtle readings of history that, for example, Robert Garland gave us before lunch, but rather, are there lessons of history based on the idea that history always repeats itself since it's based on human actions and we're always the same? Large, broad rules of history, as they're sometimes called. Is human nature unchanging, and does it always produce historical trends that are similar, predictable, and therefore knowable? An alternative view might postulate that Hitler's dreadful rise was contingent on Germany's humiliating defeat in World War I, in the Allies' decision to saddle the country with crippling debts, while stripping it of the very territories that would have generated the capital to pay those indemnities. And one might add that the virulent anti-Semitism activated by the Nazis, while recurring at various times in Europe's history, can hardly be seen as an unvarying constant. Here Thucydides and his apologists might reply, well, you're missing the point. It isn't a question of the specifics in Germany in 1933 or in 1941 or Cambodia in 1975 or Rwanda in 1994. It is A, the fact that atrocities occurred in each of these places, and B, that the absolute underlying cause of these was in each case the same. Well, if so, what is the truest cause of these dreadful events?